Welcome to Chapter 29, Hazardous Materials Regulations, Standards, and Laws. Before we dive into chemicals, placards, and PPE, we have to understand why we do what we do. This chapter gives you the framework, the rulebook, that governs every hazmat response in the U.S. A hazardous material, as defined by the Department of Transportation, is any substance or material capable of posing an unreasonable risk to health, safety, or the environment when transported, stored, or used improperly. Federal agencies, OSHA, EPA, and DOT, write and enforce regulations that keep responders and the public safe. The NFPA develops consensus standards, like NFPA 1072 and NFPA 400, that departments adopt as best practice. Everything we do on scene, from how we recognize a release to how we notify command, is dictated by these rules. Let's start by defining who does what. OSHA protects the worker. EPA protects the environment. DOT governs transportation. And NFPA tells us how to meet those expectations safely. Responders operate under 4 training levels established by OSHA 1910.120 and NFPA 1072. Awareness level personnel recognize hazards, isolate the area, and call for help. They take protective actions only. Operations level responders take defensive actions to protect people, property, and the environment. Technicians act offensively. They stop the release. Specialists provide advanced technical guidance. And the incident commander manages strategy, tactics, and resources under NFPA 1561 and NIMS/ICS. The EPA's Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, SARA Title III, and the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, EPCRA, require industries to report chemical storage to local fire departments and LEPCs, local emergency planning committees. That's why you can pull up Tier 2 data for a plant in Williamson County and know exactly what's on site before you roll out. Effective response starts long before the call. Training, continuing education, and pre-incident planning at target hazards, places where a release could seriously impact life or community, are what allow us to operate confidently and legally. So, as we move through this chapter, remember, every action we take is supported and limited by the laws and standards behind it. Watch closely. This short clip shows what a safe, disciplined hazardous materials response should look like. Everything is deliberate, no rushing, no guessing. The crew arrives, stops short, and performs an initial size-up from a safe distance. They recognize something's not right and resist the urge to charge in. They recognize indicators, placards, container shape, a visible vapor cloud. Then isolate the area and keep bystanders out. Next, they notify command and establish incident control under the ICS structure. Everyone now works through a single point of coordination. From a safe location, they identify the material using placards, the ERG, or shipping papers. Never direct contact. Hot, warm, and cold zones are established. The apparatus parks uphill and upwind. Barriers and control lines define where responders can safely operate. PPE is chosen based on the hazard, appropriate suits, gloves, and respiratory protection, meeting OSHA 1910.120 and NFPA 1992 guidelines. At the operations level, actions stay defensive, controlling runoff, closing valves remotely, and preventing the release from spreading. They maintain radio contact with command, give periodic par checks, and keep a written log, professional, controlled, accountable. Before anyone exits, decon is established in the warm zone. Air monitoring continues until the area is confirmed safe. After stabilization, they document actions and notify the LPC or other required agencies under EPCRA, closing the legal loop. Every step you just saw follows one simple formula. Recognize, isolate, notify, plan, defend, decon, document. Slow is smooth, smooth is safe. That short clip may look simple. Lego firefighters, plastic trucks, but it actually shows a textbook sequence of how a hazardous materials call should go. Let's break down why it's a solid example. First, notice how the crew didn't rush straight in. They stopped, surveyed, and recognized that something was off, the classic awareness level action. Identify, isolate, notify. Second, they established zones, hot, warm, and cold, before anyone made contact. That demonstrates early incident management and scene control principles straight out of NFPA 1072 and 29 CFR 1910.120. Third, you saw them use PPE that matched the hazard. They didn't over or underprotect. That shows understanding of OSHA HAZWOPER and NFPA 1992 ensemble selection. Exactly what we expect at the operations level. Fourth, communication. They relayed information up the chain before taking defensive action. A perfect example of operating within the incident command system under NFPA 1561. And finally, decon and demob were controlled and documented, reinforcing EPA 40 CFR 355 to 370 right to know and post-incident accountability. So even though it's animated, this video captures the mindset we want on every real-world hazmat response. Slow is smooth, smooth is safe. No panic, no freelancing, just process. Keep that mental picture. Every standard we cover in this chapter, OSHA, EPA, DOT, NFPA, is about creating that kind of disciplined response. We're setting the foundation for how responders interact with hazardous materials and weapons of mass destruction incidents. By the end of this lesson, you'll understand the legal and procedural framework that shapes every action you take on a hazmat scene. First, you'll be able to identify the difference between a hazardous materials or weapons of mass destruction incident and any other emergency. A structure fire or a vehicle crash is dangerous, but a hazmat or WMD release adds invisible threats, chemical, biological, or radiological, that require a different approach, different PPE, and different laws. Next, you'll learn how to locate your agency's emergency response plan and standard operating procedures. Every department must know where those documents are and what they say, because during an incident, they are the playbook. They outline who has authority, who calls for mutual aid, and what notifications must happen under local, state, and federal law. You'll also define key terms that appear in every regulation and standard we follow, like hazardous materials, which OSHA defines as any substance posing an unreasonable risk to health, safety, or the environment, and weapons of mass destruction, which include chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, or explosive agents. Knowing these terms ensures that everyone, from dispatchers to the IC, speaks the same language. Finally, you'll understand the differences between standards and federal regulations that govern our work. Regulations, such as OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120 and DOT 49 CFR, are enforceable by law. Standards like NFPA 1072 or NFPA 400 are consensus-based best practices that show what good looks like and are often adopted into law by states or local jurisdictions. By mastering these objectives, you'll be ready to operate safely and legally within your scope, whether that's recognizing a hazard at the awareness level or taking defensive actions at the operations level. These objectives form the backbone of the entire HMA/HMO program. And remember, hazmat firefighters don't have bad days, just highly pressurized ones. Watch closely. This is a real gas pipeline explosion in Mexico, an incident that began as a fuel leak and ended in tragedy. People from the surrounding area gathered near the leak, unaware that the vapor cloud they were standing in was flammable, toxic, and spreading quickly. Moments later, a spark ignited the vapor. The fireball consumed everything in seconds. Hundreds were injured or killed. This clip is difficult to watch, but it perfectly illustrates why hazardous materials training and laws exist. At the awareness level, responders are trained to recognize, isolate, and notify, not to rush in. Had that happened here, the crowd could have been cleared and ignition sources eliminated before disaster struck. At the operations level, responders are expected to take defensive actions, establishing zones, controlling ignition, and protecting the public through coordinated command. That discipline saves lives. Incidents like this are why OSHA, EPA, and NFPA regulations are written the way they are. They aren't red tape. They're lessons written in blood. Each paragraph of 29 CFR 1910.120 and each NFPA 1072 objective exists because someone didn't make it home. When we study these standards, we're not memorizing rules. We're preventing history from repeating itself. Because every responder has two missions: handle the hazard and make sure everyone goes home. And remember, in hazmat, complacency is more flammable than gasoline. Every hazardous materials incident requires responders who know their role and follow a structured, pre-planned response. These objectives focus on understanding the 5 levels of hazardous materials training and the importance of planning before an incident occurs. At the awareness level, responders recognize a potential hazardous materials problem, isolate the area, and notify the proper authorities. Their role is to identify and protect, not engage. At the operations level, responders take defensive actions, containing the release from a safe distance, protecting people, property, and the environment, and supporting the incident commander's strategy. Technicians move into offensive operations, entering the hot zone to stop the release and mitigate the hazard. Specialists provide advanced technical knowledge to support those technicians. The incident commander manages the overall strategy, sets objectives, and coordinates all responding agencies under NFPA 1561 and OSHA 1910.120. A planned response ties all of this together. Pre-planning identifies hazards in the community, establishes procedures, and ensures everyone operates within their training level and available resources. It also keeps the department compliant with OSHA, EPA, and NFPA standards. And remember, every written and practical test question in this course comes directly from the learning objectives. If it's listed here, it's something you'll need to know, demonstrate, and apply on the job.
April 9th, 1998, the Herrig Brothers Poultry Farm, Albert City, Iowa. 2 teenagers were joyriding on an ATV when they crashed into piping from a 42-foot-long propane storage tank. Propane gushed from the tank. An excess flow valve failed to stop the leak. The gas likely drifted toward a hot propane vaporizer 37 feet away and ignited. Flames engulfed the tank and began to heat the propane inside. 20 volunteer firefighters were called to the scene, but were unable to stop the leak. They planned to let the fire burn itself out. But meanwhile, they would spray down the adjacent turkey barns to keep the fire from spreading. Based on their training and guidance, the firefighters believed that in the event of an explosion, they would be protected if they stayed away from the ends of the burning tank. As the fire continued to rage, flames directly heated the upper section of the tank wall, above the level of the liquid. Without liquid to transfer the heat, the upper section of the tank wall began to overheat and weaken. Minutes later, the propane tank blew apart, sending metal fragments in all directions. Pieces of the tank struck the firefighters, killing 2. Other deadly fragments narrowly missed 2 others. 7 firefighters were injured. Other debris smashed into buildings. The firefighters were victims of a BLEVE, a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, a hazard they had never trained or prepared for.
This accident resulted from a lack of effective training materials for firefighters, as well as a lack of understanding of propane BLEVE hazards. If the firefighters had just kept a safe distance away from the burning tank, no one would have been harmed. And that's really the tragedy of this case.
What you just saw in that propane explosion video is exactly why hazardous materials, training levels, and pre-plans matter. Uncontrolled fuel, improper tactics, and lack of coordination led to catastrophic results. If the awareness level responders had recognized the signs earlier, they could have isolated the area and prevented ignition. If operations level personnel had established zones, controlled utilities, and communicated through command, the incident might have ended without loss. This video drives home a single point. Training level determines outcome. Knowing your scope, following your plan, and coordinating through ICS keeps responders alive and the community safe. Every drill, every standard, every objective exists to prevent the next video from being about us. Everything we do in hazardous materials response relies on having a plan, not just one plan, but a plan with depth. That's why our program uses the PAC philosophy: primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. Your primary plan is what should work under ideal conditions. Your alternate plan covers what you'll do if the first plan fails or conditions change. Contingency plans are your backup for when resources or personnel are limited. And your emergency plan is what keeps people alive when everything else has gone wrong. This mindset isn't just for the military. It's how professional responders stay safe, adaptable, and in control under pressure. Whether you're establishing zones, planning decon routes, or coordinating mutual aid, PACE ensures you always have options before the incident forces you to improvise. That's the difference between reaction and readiness, and why our entire training program is built around the PACE way of thinking. Every incident we respond to, fire, medical, rescue, or hazmat, follows the same order of priorities. Number 1, life safety. That means protecting the public, responders, and anyone directly affected by the release. Nothing takes precedence over keeping people alive and out of danger. Number 2, incident stabilization. We control the situation, stop the spread, and prevent it from getting worse. That's where training, PPE, and coordination through command make the difference. Number 3, property conservation. Only after life and the incident are stabilized do we focus on protecting property, equipment, or the environment. These priorities keep every responder aligned when chaos hits: life safety, incident stabilization, property protection. Always in that order. Firefighters, law enforcement officers, and EMS personnel respond to every kind of call imaginable: structure fires, medical emergencies, traffic crashes, rescues, and occasionally acts of terrorism. Each of these incidents can involve hazardous substances that threaten lives, property, or the environment. Most of the time, we're dealing with familiar risks: fire, trauma, or exposure to smoke and heat. But when the situation involves, or even suspects, the presence of a hazardous material, the entire nature of the incident changes. Our priorities, our tactics, and especially our mindset must change with it. Hazardous materials incidents are different because the threat is often invisible. You can't always see, smell, or hear the danger until it's already affecting people or the environment. That's why early recognition, isolation, and proper communication through the chain of command are critical from the first arriving unit. As responders, we operate under clear standards: OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120, NFPA 1072, and EPA 40 CFR 355 to 370, all designed to protect us while we protect others. The key is approaching every call with disciplined awareness. Assume there may be a hazardous component until you can prove there isn't. From this point forward in the course, we'll learn how to apply that mindset to every scene. So when the environment changes, our tactics and our safety stay one step ahead. Your ability to recognize a potential hazardous materials or weapons of mass destruction incident is the single most important step in keeping everyone safe. You can't control what you don't recognize. And in hazmat response, that moment of recognition defines everything that follows. Sometimes the hazard is obvious: a tanker overturned, a strong chemical odor, or placards on a railcar. But other times it's subtle: an unknown liquid on a floor, a sudden group of people feeling sick, or a call that just doesn't feel right. That's why awareness level training emphasizes observation, caution, and patience before action. Unknown substances could be present, or the setting might make it difficult to get the full picture right away. Large-scale incidents, like train derailments or industrial explosions, often involve multiple agencies and hidden hazards. These scenes demand that we slow down, size up carefully, and take a deliberate, methodical approach rather than rushing in. A hazmat call isn't about speed. It's about safety, coordination, and control. Your role is to protect yourself, your crew, and the public until the full scope of the hazard is known. Recognizing a potential hazardous materials or WMD incident early allows you to do exactly that. Protect life first, stabilize the incident second, and prevent further damage to property or the environment. Hazardous materials incidents must be handled differently than structure fires or typical rescue calls. Firefighting often rewards fast, aggressive tactics, but hazmat requires a deliberate, calculated approach. When you arrive at a hazmat scene, unknown substances may be present, and it takes time to determine what you're dealing with. You'll need time to get oriented to the potential hazards, identify the materials involved, and define a safe, effective approach that avoids exposure. That means reading the scene carefully, using resources like the ERG, placards, shipping papers, and specialized detection equipment when available. Unlike firefighting, success in hazmat isn't measured by how quickly you move, but by how safely you operate. Every step is deliberate, based on your level of training and the scope of your certification under NFPA 1072 and OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120. If you're at the awareness level, your role stops at recognizing, isolating, and notifying. At the operations level, you work defensively, protecting life, the environment, and property from a safe distance. Always remember, your actions are limited by your training, and your safety depends on your patience. In hazmat, slow is smooth, and smooth is safe. Every hazardous materials or WMD incident is shaped by three main factors: the chemicals involved, the environment, and the way those chemicals behave once released. First, the chemical or hazard itself determines everything from toxicity and flammability to the protective equipment required, and how the area must be isolated. Ammonia, chlorine, propane, and acids each behave very differently, and each demands a specific response strategy. Second, environmental influences, wind, rain, temperature, terrain, and even sunlight, can completely change how the incident behaves. A vapor cloud on a cold, still morning may hug the ground and travel for miles, while the same release on a hot, windy day could dissipate quickly or shift unpredictably. Third, we have to consider chemical behavior during the release, whether it's a liquid spill, gas leak, pressurized rupture, or reaction. The physical state of the material and the type of container failure both drive the level of risk and the tactics used to control it. All personnel must understand that these three factors, chemical properties, environmental conditions, and behavior during release, dictate the entire response plan. They define what actions are safe, what resources are needed, and when it's time to back off and reevaluate. In short, the nature of the hazard and the conditions around it, not the responders, set the pace and direction of the incident. In many hazardous materials or WMD incidents, the response doesn't end when the scene is stabilized. It often becomes part of a criminal investigation. That's why it's critical for responders to remain aware of the law enforcement aspect of these events. Whether it's an illegal dumping operation, a deliberate chemical release, or a terrorism-related event, responders are often the first to see and potentially disturb evidence that could identify who was responsible. Even something as simple as moving a container, stepping through a spill, or discarding protective gloves can unintentionally destroy key forensic information. Whenever you suspect a criminal act, treat the area as a potential crime scene. Avoid disturbing objects unnecessarily, limit entry and exit points, and document any movement or actions within the hazard area. Notify law enforcement and unified command as soon as possible so they can coordinate evidence collection once it's safe to enter. The goal is always the same: protect life first, stabilize the incident second, and preserve evidence third. Your attention to detail may later help investigators identify, capture, and prosecute the person or group responsible for the release. In hazmat response, every observation matters. because sometimes the smallest clue leads to the biggest answer. Before we can safely respond to any incident, we have to understand what qualifies as a hazardous material, also called dangerous goods under international transport regulations. A hazardous material is any substance or material capable of posing an unreasonable risk to human health, safety, or the environment. This definition comes directly from federal law under 49 CFR and forms the foundation for how we classify, transport, and handle chemicals across industries. Hazardous materials aren't limited to large industrial facilities. They're everywhere, in transportation, agriculture, laboratories, hospitals, and even households. Examples include hazardous waste, such as industrial byproducts or discarded chemicals, marine pollutants, which can harm aquatic ecosystems during transport or spills, elevated temperature materials like asphalt or molten sulfur that create burns or vapor hazards, illicit laboratories, where chemicals are often unstable or improperly stored, environmental crimes, such as illegal dumping or unauthorized releases, and industrial sabotage, where intentional acts cause chemical releases or contamination. Understanding what qualifies as a hazardous material is the first step toward recognition and risk assessment. If a substance can burn, explode, react, corrode, poison, or contaminate, it's hazardous, and it demands a deliberate, trained response. When we talk about weapons of mass destruction or WMDs, we're referring to any weapon or material designed to cause death, serious injury, or widespread destruction. These weapons don't just threaten individual lives. They have the potential to impact entire communities, cities, or even regions. By definition, a WMD is any device or substance intended to cause mass casualties, major structural damage, or long-term environmental harm. They can take many forms: explosive, chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear, each with unique hazards and response challenges. For example, an explosive or incendiary bomb that disperses a toxic chemical, biological agent, or radioactive material qualifies as a WMD. Even a small-scale attack using these materials can overwhelm local resources and require federal coordination. For first responders, recognizing a potential WMD incident is critical. If something doesn't match a normal fire or chemical release, assume the worst, protect yourself, isolate the scene, and notify command immediately. At this level of training, your goal isn't to confront the weapon, it's to recognize, isolate, and preserve life until specialized teams take over. Your awareness and quick recognition are the first steps in preventing a large-scale disaster. Weapons of mass destruction come in several forms, each with unique threats and response requirements. Understanding these categories helps responders recognize what they're facing before they act. First, chemical weapons. These include nerve agents like sarin or VX and blister agents such as mustard gas. They attack the body's nervous system or skin, spreading rapidly through contact or vapor. Chemical weapons have been used in warfare and terrorism for over a century, and they remain one of the fastest-acting forms of mass destruction. Next, biological weapons. Agents like anthrax or smallpox cause infection and illness. These are especially dangerous because they may not be recognized immediately. Symptoms can appear hours or days later, spreading far beyond the original site. Radiological weapons, such as a dirty bomb or improvised nuclear device, use conventional explosives to scatter radioactive materials. While the blast itself may be small, contamination and fear can disrupt entire cities. Finally, nuclear weapons, such as atomic or hydrogen bombs, represent the most destructive potential of all. Although rare, understanding their effects and coordination procedures ensures that first responders can support safely under federal guidance if such an event ever occurs. Each of these categories demands recognition, isolation, and a calm, methodical response. Rushing in without full awareness only increases the number of victims, including responders. Now, to give you a sense of how these weapons evolved and why today's international laws and safety standards exist, we'll look at a short video that traces the history of chemical and WMD use, from early battlefield deployment to modern global regulation. Let's watch.
In January 1915, German troops used chlorine gas on the Western Front, the first large-scale use of chemical weapons in history. Throughout the conflict, chlorine, phosgene and mustard gas became weapons of war on both sides. By the end of the First World War in 1918, chemical warfare had killed 90,000 soldiers and injured around 1 million. After the war, the League of Nations signed the Geneva Protocol, banning the use of chemical weapons. But several countries didn't sign up. The US Chemical Society successfully lobbied the Senate not to ratify the treaty. America eventually joined in 1975.
The Great War is so recent a memory. How can its horrors have been so quickly forgotten?
10 years after the Geneva Protocol, Italy dropped mustard gas bombs on Ethiopia. Only lethal in around 1% of cases, it caused severe blistering, incapacitating Ethiopian soldiers.
Shanghai becomes a lurid monument to the horror and havoc of modern war.
In 1937, the Empire of Japan deployed mustard gas as it invaded China. Each of the 375 separate gas attacks were personally authorized by Emperor Hirohito.
The Nazis had begun their shattering blitz on Britain.
At the start of World War II, the UK government distributed gas masks to everyone in Britain.
This hand rattle means gas. Put on your gas mask.
Because of this preparation and fearing retaliation in kind, Adolf Hitler decided against using chemical weapons on the Allies. But hydrogen cyanide was used in concentration camps, where 6 million were murdered.
A lot of it was by choppers, hoping to catch the enemy by surprise.
When America entered the Vietnam War in 1965, chemical weapons weren't used directly against the Viet Cong, but the US sprayed Agent Orange onto forests, stripping leaves from trees, making it harder for the Viet Cong to hide in the jungle. The long-term side effects of the chemical, birth defects and neurological problems, still plague communities where Agent Orange was dropped more than 40 years later. In the 1980s, Baghdad ramped up its chemical weapons program with equipment and precursors bought from companies in Europe. Saddam Hussein used a variety of nerve agents to kill an estimated 50 to 100,000 Iranian soldiers and civilians. He also used chemical weapons on his own people. In 1988, 5,000 were killed in the Halabja massacre as part of an ethnic cleansing campaign against Iraqi Kurds. US troops entered Iraq in 1990 after Baghdad invaded Kuwait. Despite numerous threats, chemical weapons were not used by Saddam Hussein, but American soldiers were inadvertently exposed to nerve agents while destroying weapon stockpiles, causing lasting health issues known as Gulf War syndrome. In 1995, sarin gas was released on 3 subway lines in Tokyo. 12 people died and hundreds were injured in the attack, carried out by members of the Aum Shinrikyo doomsday cult. In 2003, coalition forces led by the US invaded Iraq. Flawed intelligence circulated between the UK and the US said Baghdad had rebuilt its chemical weapons program. No evidence of chemical weapons was found. Several high-ranking government officials were sentenced to death for their role in the Halabja massacre. Saddam Hussein was executed for other war crimes. Syria's chemical weapons program began in the 1970s. Damascus is thought to have amassed one of the world's largest nerve agent stockpiles. The largest attack in the Civil War was in 2013, when sarin gas killed around 1,400 people. After pressure from the US and Russia, the government claimed to have disposed of its chemical weapons arsenal. Since then, dozens more attacks have taken place. The regime and rebels blame each other. In April 2017, a sarin gas strike killed around 80 people in northwest Syria. Once again, Damascus and Moscow claimed the attack was staged by rebels. For the first time, America bombed Syrian military targets as a result. The US also imposed a wave of sanctions on Syrian scientists. It's not yet clear if sanctions and airstrikes will be enough to stop future attacks.
That short video shows how chemical and other weapons of mass destruction have evolved, from early battlefield experiments to large-scale industrial and terrorist use. Every major event you saw led to new safety laws, international treaties, and emergency response standards. Those hard-learned lessons are why we have OSHA 1910.120, NFPA 1072, and national preparedness frameworks today. For us as responders, the takeaway is simple. History wrote the rules. Our job is to apply them. By understanding how these incidents unfolded in the past, we can recognize the warning signs sooner, operate within our scope, and protect lives before history repeats itself. Now that we've seen how chemical and WMD materials can affect people and the environment, let's look at something much more common, but often just as dangerous: hazardous waste. Hazardous waste is what remains after a process or manufacturing activity has used a substance and the material is no longer pure. It might be leftover chemicals from a factory, residues from vehicle maintenance, or byproducts from a lab. Don't let the word waste fool you. These materials can be just as dangerous as the original chemicals. They can react with other substances, produce toxic vapors, or even reignite fires if improperly stored. Many times, hazardous waste consists of mixtures of chemicals, meaning the exact hazards are unknown. For first responders, that uncertainty means treating every container, drum, or spill with extreme caution until identification and monitoring confirm what you're dealing with. When we talk about hazardous waste, mixtures of several chemicals are some of the most dangerous and time-consuming to deal with on a scene. Unlike a single known product with an SDS and a clear hazard class, a mixture may be the result of years of disposal, solvents, paints, fuels, oils, and acids all dumped into the same container. Over time, they can react, separate into layers, or even generate gases under pressure. That's why these mixtures are so difficult to handle. First, it's often impossible to identify what the mixture is made of without laboratory testing or field detection equipment. Second, without knowing the ingredients, we can't predict how it will react with water, air, other chemicals nearby, or even with the materials of the container itself. Corrosion and off-gassing are common signs of a dangerous reaction already in progress. The third challenge is deciding if it's safe to release or move. Even routine cleanup efforts can turn deadly if responders assume waste means inactive. Many of these mixtures are just as reactive, flammable, or toxic as the original chemicals they came from, sometimes more so due to decomposition or contamination. That's why hazardous waste sites and illegal dumping areas are handled cautiously, often requiring coordination between fire, environmental, and law enforcement agencies. If you don't know what it is, don't touch it. Treat every unmarked container or unknown mixture as a high-risk material until monitoring, sampling, and professional analysis confirm otherwise. When we talk about handling hazardous materials or WMD incidents, it's not just about skill and experience. It's also about following the rules and standards that protect responders, the public, and the environment. Let's break this down. Regulations are mandates, the law issued and enforced by government agencies. For hazardous materials response, the key regulator is OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. OSHA's 29 CFR 1910.120, also known as HAZWOPER, is the federal law that governs how hazardous materials and WMD responders are trained, equipped, and protected. If your agency fails to follow OSHA regulations, you're not just breaking a rule. You're violating federal law and putting people at risk. On the other hand, standards are usually developed by non-governmental organizations, often through a consensus process among experts, manufacturers, and fire service professionals. A great example is the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA. NFPA standards, like NFPA 472 and the updated NFPA 1072, define the performance, training, and competency requirements for hazardous materials responders. They're not automatically law, but many states and local agencies choose to adopt them as policy or integrate them into their operating guidelines. So in short, OSHA tells you what you must do by law. NFPA shows you how to do it safely and effectively. Together, they form the backbone of every compliant and professional hazmat response program. Now that we've looked at how OSHA regulations and NFPA standards work together, let's connect the two. HAZWOPER, or Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response, is the OSHA regulation that sets the legal baseline for hazardous materials response in the United States. It defines the minimum level of training and safety requirements that every responder, from awareness level personnel to incident commanders, must meet before engaging in hazmat operations. On the standard side, NFPA 470, the Hazardous Materials/Weapons of Mass Destruction Standard for responders, provides the detailed competencies and performance objectives that responders are expected to demonstrate in the field. NFPA 470 merged the previous NFPA 472 for 173 and 1072 into a single, streamlined standard, aligning it directly with HAZWOPER so that training programs and certification systems across the country stay consistent. Both HAZWOPER and NFPA 470 outline similar training levels. Awareness, for responders who recognize and report a hazmat release. Operations, for those who take defensive actions to protect people and the environment. Technician, for personnel who work offensively to stop the release. Specialist, for advanced subject matter experts. And Incident Commander, for those responsible for managing the entire response. The key takeaway is this: OSHA makes HAZWOPER the law. NFPA 470 tells you how to meet it safely and effectively. Together, they define the professional standard for every hazmat or WMD responder operating in the U.S. Now that we've talked about the training levels in HAZWOPER and NFPA 470, let's look at how those levels tie into the three modes of response you'll use at a hazmat incident: non-intervention, defensive, and offensive. Each mode reflects how much risk we're willing to take and how close we're going to get to the problem. We start with the most conservative, non-intervention mode. In this mode, responders do not operate near the hazardous materials, container, or product. The focus is entirely on protecting the public and isolating the area, not on stopping or controlling the release. You might see this applied in large-scale or high-risk incidents. For example, a rail car carrying an unknown chemical that's venting under pressure, or a tanker truck involved in a crash that's too unstable to approach. In those situations, the safest course of action may be to evacuate downwind areas, establish isolation zones, and allow the product to take its natural course while specialists and technical teams develop a plan. It's important to understand. Non-intervention is still an active decision. It's not doing nothing. It's choosing to protect life and limit exposure until conditions are safe enough for defensive or offensive operations to begin. This mindset aligns directly with our incident priorities: life safety, incident stabilization, and property conservation. In that order. Choosing non-intervention honors that order when conditions make entry unsafe. On the next slide, we'll move into the defensive mode, where responders start taking limited, indirect actions to control the incident without making direct contact with the product. Moving from non-intervention, the next step up in our 3 modes of response is the defensive mode. Here, responders take limited, indirect actions to control or reduce the effects of a hazardous materials release, all while avoiding direct contact with the product or its container. In defensive mode, the priority is still life safety, but we're now beginning to stabilize the incident through tactics that keep responders out of the hot zone. Typical examples might include diking, damming, or diverting runoff to keep a spill out of waterways, applying vapor suppression foam, or setting up protective lines to prevent the spread of fire or contamination. The goal is containment, not entry. We're not trying to plug the leak or handle the container. That's technician-level work. Instead, we're containing the problem from a safe distance using the tools, training, and PPE appropriate to the operations level under NFPA 470 and OSHA HAZWOPER. Responders operating in defensive mode face medium risk, greater than non-intervention, but still within the boundaries of safety when proper precautions are taken. This mode is often the sweet spot for most fire service hazmat responses, balancing effective control with responder protection. Remember, defensive actions buy time, limit damage, and prepare the scene for the technicians who may move into offensive operations once conditions are stable. On the next slide, we'll look at that highest risk level, the offensive mode, where responders work directly with the product or container to stop the release. Now that we've covered non-intervention and defensive modes, let's move into the third and final response mode, offensive. The offensive mode represents the highest level of engagement and risk on a hazardous materials scene. In this mode, responders have direct contact with the material or container. They take aggressive, hands-on actions to control, stop, or mitigate the release at its source. These are the men and women who are up close to the leak, the rupture, or the chemical reaction, physically operating valves, applying patches, overpacking drums, or transferring product. Their goal isn't just containment, it's complete control of the incident. Because this mode involves the greatest exposure potential, it also carries the highest training and PPE requirements. Under NFPA 470, 2022, and OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120Q, this work is strictly limited to hazardous materials technicians or higher. Technicians receive advanced training on chemical behavior, PPE selection, monitoring equipment, and DECON procedures. They understand how to interpret product data from ERGs, SDSs, and Cameo/Aloha/Marplot systems, and how to match those hazards with proper control strategies. What offensive operations involve? Offensive operations may include stopping or plugging a leak on a damaged tank or valve, transferring a product from a damaged container to a secure one, neutralizing or absorbing hazardous substances at their source, repairing a breached container while operating in full vapor protective suits, level A or B. Because the responders are directly intervening, they must operate from a formal incident action plan, IAP, developed by the hazmat branch or group supervisor. That plan outlines entry objectives, PPE levels, communication procedures, decontamination lines, and emergency evacuation signals. The safety officer and entry team leader confirm that every member understands a plan and their assignment before crossing into the hot zone. Risk management in offensive operations. When we're talking offensive mode, we're talking high-risk/high-reward operations. That's why the risk-benefit model applies so heavily here. We risk a lot to save a lot. We risk little to save what's already lost. If the potential gain doesn't justify the exposure, we don't make that entry. This mindset keeps responders from becoming secondary victims, which is one of the leading contributors to fatalities in hazmat events. Operations level limitations. Now, let's clarify the boundary between operations level and technician level responders. Operations level responders typically work in the defensive mode, setting perimeters, establishing zones, diking, damming, diverting, and protecting the public. They do not normally enter the hot zone or make physical contact with the hazardous material or its container. Doing so without the appropriate training, PPE, and supervision would not only violate NFPA 470, but also federal OSHA regulations under the HAZWOPER standard. The Life Safety Rescue Exception, NFPA 470. However, there is one limited and critical exception to this rule: life safety rescue. NFPA 470 allows an operations-level responder to enter the hot zone only if there is a confirmed immediate threat to life and the PPE they are wearing is verified to protect them from the specific product involved. This is not a blanket permission. It's a last resort authorization for time-critical, life-saving action. Before entry, a rapid hazard assessment must be completed. The product must be identified and researched. Compatibility of available PPE must be confirmed, not assumed. Decon and backup teams must already be staged and operational. The incident commander or hazmat branch must approve the entry. If the chemical is unknown or PPE limitations are uncertain, the entry must not occur until a technician-level team arrives with proper protection and monitoring support. The mission for operations-level personnel under this exception is simple: rescue only, not mitigation, not control. Get the victim and get out. Once the victim is extracted to the warm zone, gross decon and medical treatment begin immediately, followed by full responder decon before they leave the corridor. An unprotected entry into the hot zone can turn a single victim into multiple. This is why NFPA 470 stresses that risk must always be managed, not ignored. Operations-level responders play a vital role in hazmat incidents, but their priority is defensive action and life safety coordination, not direct leak control. Only when PPE is confirmed adequate, when the IC authorizes it, and when a life can truly be saved, that's when limited entry may be justified. So, to sum it up, offensive mode means direct contact with the product and hands-on control. It's technician-level territory, requiring specialized training and PPE. Operations-level responders may only enter for verified, time-critical life safety rescues, and only after research confirms their PPE protects them from the hazard. Every entry is guided by a risk-benefit analysis, a formal IAP, and strict decon procedures. In short, we fight smart, not blind. We risk lives only when we can truly save lives, safely and deliberately. Now that we've talked about offensive mode and its risks, this slide highlights the only time operations-level responders may enter the hot zone under NFPA 470, a verified life safety rescue. This exception exists to give responders one narrow option when a life can still be saved and the benefits clearly outweigh the risks. But for that to happen safely, every one of these 6 conditions must be met. First, there must be a confirmed immediate life safety emergency, not a body recovery or property concern. Second, The product must be identified so we know exactly what we're dealing with. Guesswork is unacceptable. Third, the PP available must be verified to protect against that product at the concentrations expected. That means consulting references or specialists before moving in. Fourth, the incident commander must authorize the entry, and it must be part of a written or verbal incident action plan. Fifth, decon and backup teams must already be in place and ready. You never go in without a way out. And finally, the mission is rescue only. No patching, no plugging, no product control. Get the victim, move them to the warm zone, and go directly to decon. This exception emphasizes that operations-level rescuers don't freelance. They act under plan, command, and protection. When done correctly, this limited entry can save lives without creating new victims. Now that we've covered response modes and training levels under NFPA 470, let's talk about where most first-arriving responders, including firefighters, law enforcement, and EMS, actually fit in the awareness level. According to NFPA 470 and OSHA's HAZWOPER standard, awareness level personnel are those individuals who, during the course of their normal duties, could encounter an emergency involving hazardous materials or weapons of mass destruction, WMD, and who are expected to recognize the presence of those materials. That's the key phrase, recognize the presence. They're not expected to fix the problem or enter the hot zone. Their job is to identify, notify, and isolate. Let's break that down. 1. Identify. An awareness-level responder must be able to recognize the potential presence of a hazardous material. That means using clues such as placards and labels under the DOT system, container shapes and markings, senses other than smell or taste, like visual vapor clouds or dead vegetation, information from witnesses, drivers, or facility staff. They must be able to say, something's not right here. This looks like a hazmat situation. 2. Notify. Once they suspect a hazmat or WMD event, their next duty is to notify the appropriate authorities, dispatch, the incident commander, or the regional hazardous materials team. Notification should include what's seen, where it's happening, any potential exposures, and whether there are victims or secondary threats. This step is critical because time lost in notification is time lost in protection. 3. Isolate. Finally, awareness-level personnel must isolate the area to protect themselves, bystanders, and the public. That means establishing an initial perimeter, controlling entry points, keeping uninvolved persons upwind and uphill when possible, securing the scene until trained operations or technician-level responders arrive. They do not attempt rescue or mitigation unless it can be done safely from outside the hazard area. The awareness level is the foundation of all hazardous materials response. If the person who arrives first can't recognize what they're seeing, everything else fails. So the focus here is on situational awareness, recognition, and immediate protective action, not on entry or control. Every firefighter, officer, or responder who may stumble upon a tanker rollover, leaking drum, or suspicious package must have this mindset. Identify, notify, isolate. That's how lives are saved before the hazmat team even arrives. All right, let's talk about what awareness-level responders actually do. We already know their mission: identify, notify, and isolate. But what does that look like on scene? Here's how it plays out in the real world. First, awareness personnel are trained to analyze what they're seeing and recognize the signs of a hazardous materials or WMD event. That doesn't mean they're scientists. It means they know how to spot the clues. Maybe it's a leaking drum, an overturned tanker, a strange vapor cloud, or even a patient showing odd symptoms. When something doesn't look or feel right, that's your first red flag. Recognize it early, stay back, and start building that mental picture of what you're dealing with. Next, every responder at this level should know how to use their emergency response guidebook, the good old ERG. This little orange book is your quick reaction tool. If you've got a placard, a 4-digit UN number, or even just a hazard symbol, the ERG will tell you what class of material it is, what the immediate dangers are, and how far people should be moved away. It's not about fixing the problem. It's about keeping yourself and the public out of danger until the hazmat team arrives. Now, once you've figured out what might be involved, the next step is to identify the potential hazards. Ask yourself, is it flammable? Could it explode? Is it giving off toxic vapors or reacting with water? Those quick questions help you make better choices, like setting your staging area upwind, uphill, and upstream, or keeping bystanders back behind a solid barrier. After that, you move into protective actions. This is where awareness personnel can make a huge difference without ever getting close to the hazard. Maybe you block traffic, shut down access roads, or guide people away from the danger area. You're not handling the material. You're buying time and keeping the scene safe for the specialists who are on their way. And finally, it all comes down to communication. That means getting good information to dispatch or the incident commander quickly. What do you see? What's leaking? What placards are visible? How many people might be exposed? And what actions have you already taken? Be calm, be clear, and be accurate. That early report shapes the entire response that follows. So in short, awareness personnel don't go in, they don't plug leaks, and they don't wear level A suits. Their job is to see the danger, protect others from it, and call in the right help. They're the ones who set the stage for a safe, organized, and successful hazmat response. If they get that part right, everyone down the line has a better chance of going home safe. Now we move into the operations level. This is the next step up from awareness. These are the folks who don't just recognize a hazardous materials or WMD incident. They're trained and equipped to take limited defensive actions to protect people, the environment, and property. Think of it this way. Awareness level responders see the problem and call for help. Operations level responders can take action from a safe distance while that help is on the way. So, what does that look like in the real world? An operations level responder is trained to work around the hot zone, not inside it, but close enough to take steps that reduce the spread or the impact of the release. They might be the ones building dikes or dams to stop a spill, setting up diversion booms, or deploying absorbent pads to keep a leak out of a storm drain or waterway. They're protecting lives and property without ever directly contacting the product. Their main mission is protection, protecting nearby people, protecting the environment, and protecting property. That could mean guiding evacuations, setting up isolation perimeters, or supporting decontamination efforts for exposed victims. It could also mean managing runoff, securing ignition sources, or coordinating with hazmat technicians once they arrive. Now, here's an important point to emphasize. Operations level responders do not make offensive entries or take direct contact with a material unless it's a life safety situation. And even then, only after confirming that their PPE and the conditions will protect them from harm. Under NFPA 470, these responders are trained in hazard and risk assessment, basic control, and containment operations, but everything they do is built around defensive tactics. Let's put it into perspective. If you're at a crash involving a tanker truck that's leaking, the awareness responder would identify the placard, pull the ERG, and start isolation. The operations level crew would be the ones building dikes to keep the product from running downhill, controlling ignition sources, and setting up mass decon if people are contaminated. They're not fixing the leak. They're buying time and reducing harm. At this level, responders start blending their fireground skills with hazmat awareness. They understand zones of control, hot, warm, and cold, and they know how to operate safely near the hazard line. They're also learning how to read containers, recognize stress points, and predict potential failure. It's a more hands-on level of response, but it's still firmly rooted in safety, distance, and defensive action. In short, operations-level responders are the shield, not the sword. They don't attack the problem. They protect everything around it. They make it possible for the technicians to arrive, suit up, and go in under safer, more controlled conditions. Now that we've established what operations-level responders do, let's talk about how their training breaks down, because this is where NFPA 470 really starts to define their world. At this level, we separate the required knowledge into two categories: core competencies and mission-specific competencies. Think of core competencies as your foundation. Every operations-level responder, no matter where they work or what kind of department they're in, is expected to know these. They're the baseline skills that allow you to operate safely, effectively, and legally at a hazardous materials or WMD incident. These are the must-haves. You'll see in a moment that they cover things like analyzing the scene, identifying hazards, estimating potential harm, and setting up decon operations. Everything needed to manage a defensive response. Then we move into mission-specific competencies. This is where things start to tailor to your department's actual risks and response profile. These competencies are add-ons, designed to give responders advanced skills in certain areas like detection and monitoring, product control, or evidence preservation. Not every agency trains to all of them, and that's by design. They're chosen based on what your jurisdiction faces most often. So here's how this connects. Core competencies give you the framework to respond to any hazmat or WMD incident safely. Mission-specific competencies let you customize that framework to meet the hazards in your community. Together, they define your operational limits, what you can do, what PP you use, and how far you go before you call in a technician-level team. Let's take a closer look at those two categories. We'll start with the core competencies, the essential skills every operations-level responder must master. And then we'll move into the mission-specific areas that build on top of that foundation. Now that we've talked about the two categories of operations-level training, let's start with the foundation, core competencies. These are the essential skills that every operations-level responder must know and demonstrate, no matter what kind of department or region they work in. Think of them as the universal playbook for defensive hazmat operations. The things that allow you to work safely, make informed decisions, and keep an incident from escalating. Let's walk through them. First, we have analyzing the scene to determine the scope. Before you can do anything safely, you've got to size up what's really happening. How big is the problem? How much product has been released? What's threatened? People, property, the environment. This step sets the tone for everything that follows. Next, surveying the scene to identify containers and materials involved. You might be dealing with drums, totes, rail cars, or pressurized cylinders. Each has its own risk profile. Recognizing the container type gives you clues about what's inside and how it might behave if it fails. Then, collecting information from available reference sources. That could mean consulting the Emergency Response Guidebook, Chemtrec, safety data sheets, or even talking to a facility representative. At this point, information is your best protection. You can't mitigate what you don't understand. Now, we move into predicting the likely behavior of the hazardous material. Will it vaporize and spread through the air? Flow downhill? React violently with water? Being able to read the signs early, vapor clouds, container stress, wind direction, keeps you one step ahead of the incident. Once you've got that picture, it's time to estimate the potential harm. This is where training and instinct meet. Ask yourself, who Or what is at risk if this gets worse? The public, responders, nearby property, waterways, or critical infrastructure? Your answer helps define the size of your isolation zones and your tactical priorities. Next up, planning a response, including the selection of PPE. At the operations level, we're still focused on defensive strategies, controlling or limiting the spread of the product, not stopping the leak itself. Choosing the right PPE means balancing protection with mobility and understanding your limits. You only go as far as your gear allows. Performing decontamination is another cornerstone skill. Operations-level responders need to know how to establish and run both emergency and technical decon lines for victims, equipment, and personnel. Good decon doesn't just protect responders. It protects hospitals, the environment, and the community from secondary contamination. Then there's preserving evidence. Even though our first priority is life safety, we can't forget that hazmat incidents often have criminal or regulatory implications. From illicit labs to transportation accidents, maintaining a controlled scene can make or break an investigation later. That means limiting unnecessary entry, documenting what you see, and coordinating with law enforcement. Finally, evaluating the effectiveness of your response. This step is often overlooked in the chaos of cleanup, but it's what separates good responders from great ones. Ask, did our actions make the situation better or worse? Are we still operating within safe limits? Do we need to adjust our strategy or PPE? Now that we've covered the core competencies, the foundation every operations-level responder needs, let's look at the next layer, mission-specific competencies. These are the advanced or specialized skills that agencies can add depending on what kinds of hazards they're most likely to face. They're not required for every operations responder, but they're available for those departments that need to go a little deeper, where the risks are higher or the response expectations are greater. Let's walk through a few examples. It starts with personal protective equipment. This goes beyond basic awareness of PPE. Here, responders train to select, inspect, don, operate in, and doff PPE safely, especially chemical protective clothing. That means understanding limitations, compatibility, heat stress, and emergency procedures for failure or contamination. Next, mass decontamination. If you've ever been part of a large-scale hazmat or WMD drill, you know this can get chaotic fast. Mission-specific training covers how to set up and manage decon corridors for large groups, civilians, responders, or both, while maintaining privacy, contamination control, and throughput efficiency. Then we have technical decontamination, which is a more deliberate, controlled process, usually for responders exiting the hot zone or handling specialized equipment. It requires more coordination, PPE discipline, and sometimes the use of detection instruments to confirm cleanliness. Evidence preservation and public safety sampling is another key mission area. Here, the focus is on maintaining scene integrity, collecting or protecting evidence for law enforcement or regulatory agencies without compromising safety. That can include sampling unknown substances, labeling containers, or documenting chain of custody. Product control is where responders begin to move beyond pure defense. While we're still operating within operations-level limits, this competency trains personnel to perform limited leak control or containment actions when conditions and PPE are verified safe. For example, applying patch kits, using absorbents, or operating valves. Then there's detection, monitoring, and sampling. This is critical for determining what's in the air, water, or soil, and whether it's safe to re-enter an area. Operations-level responders trained in this can deploy instruments, interpret readings, and communicate findings to command for decision-making. Victim rescue and recovery is another specialized but vital area. This one's emotionally heavy. It involves rescuing or recovering victims from contaminated environments. The emphasis here is always on responder safety. No one goes in unless it's confirmed their PPE can protect them from the product. This ties back to that earlier point. life safety rescue may only occur after risk assessment confirms adequate protection. We also see illicit laboratory incidents, like drug or homemade explosive labs. These require extreme caution. Mission-specific training helps responders recognize these setups, withdraw safely, and coordinate with law enforcement or hazmat technicians. Then there are radiological hazard tasks, monitoring for contamination, performing decon, and supporting radiological teams. And yes, even IED or WMD operations, where operations-level responders assist in isolation, evacuation, or support functions, while EOD or federal teams handle the device itself. Finally, there's driving in contaminated environments and evidence collection. Both focus on maintaining control, safety, and documentation while working in or near contamination zones. So the big picture here is this. Mission-specific competencies take the basic operations-level foundation and sharpen it for your community's real-world risks. A small-town department near a major interstate might emphasize fuel spills and mass decon. A metro agency might prioritize air monitoring, product control, or WMD support. These options give local agencies the flexibility to build the right tool set for their operational reality, all while staying within the limits of NFPA 470 and OSHA HAZWOPER. When we talk about operations-level responders, it's important to remember that they don't work alone. Everything they do, from decon setup to product control, happens under the direction of a hazardous materials technician or higher authority. That supervision isn't just about rank, it's about safety and accountability. The technician provides real-time feedback, confirms PP selection, and ensures that the actions being taken are within the responder's level of training and capability. Think of it as a check and balance system on the hazmat scene. The technician helps analyze the hazards, evaluates conditions in the hot and warm zones, and can step in if the situation changes or becomes unsafe. This keeps the operation controlled, coordinated, and compliant with NFPA 470 and OSHA standards. In short, operations-level responders act as the hands on the ground, but technicians are the eyes and mind guiding those actions. That partnership is what makes a hazmat response safe, effective, and disciplined. Next, we'll step into the technician level, where responders move from defensive to offensive operations, actually stopping the release or neutralizing the hazard itself. We've talked about awareness-level responders recognizing a problem and operations-level responders taking defensive actions under supervision. Now we're stepping into the technician and specialist level. This is where responders move from containing the problem to actually stopping it. Technicians are the ones who go into the hot zone to make hands-on contact with the product, the container, or the system that's failed. They use what's called a risk-based response process, meaning every decision is based on the specific materials, hazards, and conditions in front of them. Let's break that down. First, they analyze the problem. Before a single step is taken, technicians identify what they're dealing with: product, quantity, phase, pressure, and exposure pathways. They look at readings from meters, container markings, and environmental conditions to understand what's happening and what could go wrong next. This analysis is what drives every other decision. Next, they plan the response. That plan may include plugging or patching a leak, transferring product to a safe container, or neutralizing a chemical. They decide what PPE is appropriate, what equipment is needed, what entry routes and backup plans are in place, and how they'll communicate once inside the hot zone. Every detail is mapped out before anyone takes a single step forward. Once the plan is set, technicians implement that planned response. This is the hands-on phase, the part that most people imagine when they think of hazmat work. It might be tightening a valve, overpacking a drum, or stopping a railcar leak. It's deliberate, it's slow, and it's done with constant air monitoring and oversight from the entry safety officer. But the work doesn't stop there. Technicians continuously evaluate progress and adjust. If readings change, PPE starts to fail, or the leak behaves differently than expected, they back out, reassess, and modify the plan. That adaptability is what keeps responders alive and makes the response successful. Finally, they assist in terminating the incident. That means documenting actions, collecting data, supporting cleanup contractors, and helping the incident commander debrief. Termination isn't just paperwork. It's how teams learn from each call to make the next one safer and more efficient. At the specialist level, things go even deeper. These responders have expertise in specific product types, like ammonia, chlorine, or radiological materials. They support the hazmat team by providing advanced knowledge, technical advice, and sometimes hands-on work with complex mitigation systems. So to sum it up, technicians and specialists are the tip of the spear in hazmat operations. They bring science, training, and composure into the most dangerous part of the scene, working methodically to end the emergency safely and restore normal operations. Now let's talk about the incident commander, or IC, the person who carries ultimate responsibility for everything that happens on that scene. According to NFPA 470, the IC is responsible for all incident activities, including the development of strategies and tactics, and the ordering and release of resources. In other words, nothing moves, no one acts, and no equipment is committed without the IC's approval and coordination. The IC sets the tone and pace of the entire operation. They analyze the situation, establish priorities, and decide whether the response will be defensive, offensive, or non-intervention. They're constantly thinking ahead, balancing responder safety, public protection, and environmental impact, while managing incoming units, outside agencies, and sometimes the media. And here's the key part. Being an IC at a hazardous materials or WMD incident requires specialized training that goes beyond normal fireground command. They must understand the chemical, physical, and toxicological behaviors of hazardous materials, as well as federal, state, and local safety regulations that apply to those responses. Every jurisdiction is a little different, so the IC's qualifications have to match both the regulatory requirements and the specific risks in that community. At the end of the day, the IC isn't just giving orders. They're maintaining control of a complex, high-risk situation where one wrong decision can make things worse fast. A good IC keeps calm, gathers information, and makes sure everyone, from awareness-level personnel to hazmat technicians, is operating within their training and assignment. When it comes to hazardous materials or WMD incidents, the truth is the response starts long before the tones drop. Pre-planning is the quiet work that happens behind the scenes, the work that often makes the biggest difference once the real call comes in. Before anyone ever pulls on PPE or opens an ERG, the foundation for a safe and successful response is built through training, continuing education, and solid pre-plans. Pre-planning means knowing what's in your district, what facilities use, store, or transport hazardous materials, what routes tankers take through your jurisdiction, and where your highest risk targets are. It's about identifying potential problem areas, like schools near industrial corridors, rail lines running through town, or old buildings with legacy chemical storage. A good pre-plan looks like what you see on the screen: detailed site information including contacts, occupancy, access points, construction, and specific hazards. It answers questions before we even have to ask them. Where's the main entrance? What's being stored inside? Is there a key box or sprinkler system? How do we isolate utilities or evacuate occupants? Those details save time and lives when the pressure's on. For the IC, a solid pre-plan turns a chaotic incident into a structured response. For the crew, it means rolling up on scene already understanding what they're walking into, the hazards, the layout, and the game plan. And pre-planning isn't a one-and-done task. It evolves, just like the risks in our communities do. As new businesses open, new chemicals come in, or new transport routes develop, pre-plans have to be updated. It's part of that ongoing cycle of readiness. Train, review, adjust, repeat. So the next time you're out doing inspections or company drills, remember, that's not busy work. That's the groundwork that keeps responders safe, keeps command informed, and keeps the community protected before the emergency ever begins. When we talk about pre-planning, it's not about guessing what might happen. It's about identifying what's actually in your community that can hurt people, responders, or the environment. Pre-planning activities start with a threat assessment. What industries, transportation routes, or storage facilities exist in your first due area? Are there propane distributors, rail lines with tank cars, or agricultural suppliers storing anhydrous ammonia? These aren't hypothetical risks. They're real hazards we need to understand before the alarm ever sounds. Once those threats are identified, the next step is coordination. Fire, EMS, law enforcement, and emergency management come together to decide. How will we respond? Who's in charge of what? What resources will we need, and where will they come from? That's where joint pre-planning pays off. You don't want to meet your partner agencies for the first time while standing in a hot zone. The time to build those relationships and those procedures is during planning and drills, not during chaos. Good pre-planning activities also look at worst-case scenarios and what can be done to prevent them. Maybe it's adding a fixed foam system at a fuel depot, improving water supply access at a chemical plant, or updating mutual aid agreements, so the right team is automatically dispatched. And remember, pre-planning isn't just for big industry. It could be as simple as identifying a pool supply store, a medical facility, or a farm with chemical storage. If it poses a risk, it deserves a plan. When we focus on the real threats that exist in our community, we're not just reacting faster, we're responding smarter. That's what turns a potential disaster into a controlled, coordinated operation. When we think about pre-planning, it's more than just a firehouse exercise or filling out a building survey form. It's about building a framework for how multiple agencies will respond when something goes wrong. Every hazardous materials or WMD response is shaped by procedures, standards, and regulations. OSHA, EPA, NFPA, DOT, and your local and state emergency plans. All of these layers surround you like ripples on a pond, each one influencing how you operate, how you communicate, and how decisions are made. When those ripples come together, they create the system that guides your actions and the actions of everyone else on scene: fire, law enforcement, EMS, emergency management, and environmental partners. Pre-planning gives everyone a common playbook. It helps agencies develop logical and appropriate response procedures for the kinds of incidents we can anticipate in our area, whether that's a fuel spill on a highway, a release at an industrial site, or a railcar leak. And here's where it gets critical. Planning should focus on the real threats in your jurisdiction, and also the threats that might be one county over. Because if a large incident happens next door, odds are you're going to be part of that mutual aid response. When pre-planning for major target hazards, like a chemical manufacturer, a propane storage yard, or a mall with multiple sprinkler and HVAC zones, your agency should be sitting down with the local Emergency Planning Committee, LPC. That's where you share information, discuss worst-case scenarios, and make sure everyone understands what resources are available and how to request them. The more those conversations happen before the alarm, the smoother the coordination is when it really matters. Because at a hazmat or WMD scene, chaos only fills the gaps left by poor planning, and good pre-plans close those gaps before they can open. At a hazmat or WMD scene, we can't run in and treat it like a structure fire. It takes a completely different mindset, one built around patience, assessment, and deliberate action. As responders, we have to slow down, think, and plan. That means taking time to analyze what's happening, what the hazards are, and what resources we have before we move. Every action needs to be well thought out and justified, not instinctive or rushed. When dealing with hazardous materials or weapons of mass destruction, we handle the situation in a more deliberate, calculated way, protecting ourselves, the public, and the environment. We define our strategy, we make rational decisions, and we stay within our level of training and competence. Remember, the goal isn't speed, it's safety and control. If we do that right, we protect more lives, including our own. Every responder needs to know where to find the emergency response plan and the standard operating procedures for their department. These documents are your playbook when things go bad. They outline what to do, who to call, how to communicate, and what actions to take, step by step. It's not enough for those plans to sit in a binder or uploaded somewhere on a shared drive. Everyone on the team should have access, be familiar with them, and know how to carry them out, within their level of training and authority. When a real hazardous materials or WMD event happens, there's no time to flip through pages or ask, what's the procedure for this? The time to learn and practice those plans is long before the alarm sounds. The departments that handle these incidents the best aren't just lucky, they're prepared. They know their plans, their people, and their roles. That's what turns confusion into coordination and chaos into control. Let's take a step back and make sure we're solid on the key definitions, because understanding these terms sets the foundation for everything else we do. When we talk about hazardous materials, we mean any substance that poses an unreasonable risk to people, property, or the environment. That could be something leaking from a rail car, a tanker truck, or even a storage container at a local business. These are materials that can burn, corrode, poison, or contaminate, and the risk goes beyond just fire. Now, weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs, take that danger to another level. These are designed intentionally to cause mass harm, destruction, or panic. That can include explosives, incendiary devices, or weapons that release toxic chemicals or radiation. Some of these may also involve hazardous materials, but the intent behind them is what changes the game. You'll often hear the term CBRN. That's an acronym for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. It's a quick way to categorize the major types of WMD threats responders might face. So in short, hazmat incidents deal with dangerous materials that cause accidental or unplanned harm. WMD incidents involve those same kinds of hazards, but used as weapons deliberately to create chaos or destruction. Remember the difference between regulations and standards. Regulations are the law. They're mandatory and enforced by government agencies like OSHA and the EPA. These are not optional. They tell us what we must do. For example, OSHA's Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response Standard, or HAZWOPER, sets the legal minimum for responder training, PPE, and safety during hazmat or WMD incidents. Standards, on the other hand, come from organizations like NFPA, and while they're not federal law, they often set the professional benchmark for how departments should operate. NFPA standards, like NFPA 470 or NFPA 472, provide detailed guidance on training, equipment, and best practices that agencies can choose to adopt, or may be required to follow if incorporated into local or state regulations. So here's the bottom line. Regulations are mandatory. Standards are models for excellence. The best departments follow both. They meet the legal minimums and then build beyond them to ensure responder safety and operational effectiveness. The different levels of hazardous materials training, because not everyone on scene plays the same role. The NFPA outlines 3 primary training levels: awareness, operations, and technician, with additional designations for specialists and incident commanders. Each level builds on the next, increasing knowledge, responsibility, and the ability to take action. At the awareness level, responders are trained to recognize the presence of a hazardous material or weapon of mass destruction. Their job isn't to stop the problem. It's to identify it, report it, and keep people safe. They operate in a non-intervention or defensive mode, meaning they don't approach the product, container, or release area. These responders should be familiar with Emergency Response Guidebook (ERG), understand placards, UN/NA identification numbers, and recognize container shapes, all of which help them determine what's involved and how dangerous it is. The focus at this level is on public protection, isolating the area, denying entry, and communicating critical information up the chain so higher trained teams can take over. Simply put, awareness level responders are the eyes and ears of the operation, the ones who first recognize that a scene isn't ordinary and make sure everyone else stays safe until the technicians arrive. When we move up to the operations level, we're now talking about responders who are trained to take action, not just recognize a problem. These responders work to protect people, property, and the environment from the effects of a hazardous material release. Their tasks start with determining the scope of the incident, figuring out what's happening, how big it is, and what's being affected. From there, they'll gather details about the product, the container, and the surrounding hazards using reference materials and databases. They plan a response, selecting the right level of personal protective equipment, deciding on control tactics, and coordinating actions to keep the problem contained. That can include controlling the release, performing decontamination, and maintaining scene safety. Even though they're hands-on, operations-level responders still work under the direction of a hazardous materials technician. Their strength is applying solid, trained judgment in the field, working as part of the larger team to keep the incident from getting worse while keeping everyone safe. At the operations level, some responders go beyond the core competencies and take on mission-specific training, skills designed for more focused or higher-risk situations. The NFPA defines these as specialty areas, and they help bridge the gap between the defensive role of an operations responder and the technical expertise of a hazmat technician. This can include advanced training in personal protective equipment, so responders understand not just how to wear PPE, but how to select the right suit for the right product. It also covers mass and technical decontamination, the large-scale operations needed to handle contamination of people, equipment, or entire areas. Other specialties involve product control, evidence collection, and evidence preservation, especially when an incident may lead to an investigation. Responders may also train in detection, monitoring, and sampling, learning to use instruments to confirm product types or contamination levels. And one of the most critical, victim rescue and recovery. Operations-level responders trained in this area may enter the hot zone, but only after verifying that their PPE provides adequate protection against that specific product. These mission-specific skills allow departments to safely expand their capabilities while maintaining a strong focus on safety, coordination, and control. When we move to the hazardous materials technician level, the focus shifts from defensive actions to proactive problem-solving. Technicians are the hands-on specialists who go directly to the source to stop, contain, or control the release. Their job includes constantly monitoring and guiding operations-level responders, making sure actions are safe, effective, and aligned with the incident plan. They're the ones providing real-time feedback and direction, using both direct observation and the information coming from those working at lower levels of PPE or in support roles. In short, they turn assessment into action, applying technical skills to physically control the leak, plug a container, or transfer product. Now, one step beyond the technician is the hazardous materials specialist, a role formally recognized in OSHA standards. Specialists have even deeper product-specific knowledge. They're the ones departments lean on when the material or reaction involved is particularly complex or rare. Together, technicians and specialists form the backbone of the hazardous materials response, combining field skill, chemistry knowledge, and precision teamwork to bring an incident under control safely. At the top of the response structure, we have the incident commander, the person ultimately responsible for all incident activities. that includes developing the strategy, setting tactics, assigning resources, and making sure every piece of the operation fits together safely and effectively. The IC has to do more than just manage people. They need a strong understanding of the incident command system and how to implement emergency response plans in real time. That means staying ahead of the curve, anticipating what resources will be needed next, and coordinating with local, state, or even federal partners if the situation escalates. They also need to understand the risks and limitations of PPE and the critical role of decontamination procedures, because one misstep in that area can quickly expand the hazard beyond the hot zone. In large or specialized incidents, the IC may even be the one to initiate a request for the federal regional response team, activating a higher level of support. So while technicians handle the product and operations level, responders control the scene. The incident commander is the one ensuring everything happens under a unified, safe, and well-coordinated plan. As we close out this chapter, let's connect it all to the regulatory backbone behind what we do, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. OSHA sets the minimum safety standards for workers across the U.S., and that includes us, first responders who operate in hazardous environments. When we talk about HAZWOPER, the Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response Standard, that's the regulation defining how we train, equip, and respond to hazardous materials incidents. HAZWOPER lines up closely with NFPA 470, defining training levels for awareness, operations, technician, and incident commander. But there's one key difference. OSHA's version officially recognizes the specialist level. These are the responders who support the technicians and act as liaisons with federal, state, and local agencies during major hazmat events. So whether you're operating a decon line, plugging a leak, or commanding the scene, remember, it's all built on a foundation of safety, teamwork, and compliance. And hey, if you ever think this stuff is overcomplicated, just remember, it's better to be overtrained than overexposed.